of the D. Verbervilles. Verbervilles. Section 1, Thomas Hardy Detailed Study. थॉमस हार्डी कौन था? ये हमने रोशन बुक सेंटर से हमने लिया है। इसमें ये जो है ये चैप्टर नंबर 1 है और ये पेज 3 है। The background, its importance. Hardy novel are a comprehensive and elaborate study of English life and manners in the opening year of the reign of Queen Victoria. Hardy matured and created during these years, and it is in the fitness of things that he has studied the life of the times with which he was most intimately familiar. This makes his novel important social documents, and a detailed consideration of Victorian life and manners is essential for a proper appreciation of Hardy art. The spirit of questioning. The most marked social changes in Victorian England took place in the later 60s and 70s, about the middle of the century. The old landmarks are still there, but they are no longer so prominent. The landed aristocracy still rules the rural part and still leads society in London and its country house gatherings. The individualist business person still flourishes with the honest, limited virtues of self help. However, these classes no longer fill most of the scene as in the past. Social institutions and the classes privileged so far have already grown corrupt and degenerate. In all rank of life, free criticism of social custom and religious belief takes the place of settled creed. There is unprecedented rise of the spirit of questioning. It's a liberal, outspoken age whose most representative men are neither the aristocrats nor the shopkeepers, but men of university education or men of trained professionals' intelligence. Dickens and Thackeray, among others, are critics of their age, the latter more so than the former. Rapid social changes, the democratic spirit, democracy, bureaucracy, and collectivism began to advance like a silent tide. Many changes mark off the age from the previous one. The impact of Darwinism began to increase on religious orthodoxy. Oxford and Cambridge were gradually open to all, irrespective of religious belief. Science and history began rapidly to take the place beside the classics and mathematics in the academic world. In order to enlist the ablest young men from the universities in the new bureaucracy, a competitive examination introduced as a normal method of entry to the civil services. The workers of the town received the right to vote by the Reforms Act of 1832, and the other acts which followed. The Foresters Act provides primary education for all. The trade union receives a new charter of rights corresponding to their growing power in business administration. Limited liabilities companies take the place of the old family firm. The professional and social emancipation of women goes forward on the lines advocated in mild subjection of women. Women's colleges are found at Oxford and Cambridge, and women's secondary schools are much improved. The Married Women Property Act releases the wife, if she has money of her own, from economic bondage to her husband. The equality of the sexes began to be advocated in theory and finds its way increasingly into the practice of all classes. The demand for the political liberation of women is the outcome of a very considerable degree of social enfranchisement already accomplished. Collapse of agriculture. However, the greatest single event fraud with immeasurable consequences for the future is the collapse of English agriculture. A series of bad seasons aggravate the trouble in initial stages, but the real cause is the development of the American grainlands within reach of the English market. English agriculture is more scientific and more highly capitalized than American, but under these conditions, the odds are too great. The overthrow of the British landed aristocracy by the far distant democracy of the American farmer is one outcome of this change of economic circumstances. An even more important consequence is the general divorce of Englishmen from life in contact with nature, which in all previous ages had helped to form the mind and the imagination of this Iceland race. Statesmen tend to regard the fate of agriculture with indifference because it involves no acute problem of unemployment. The farm laborer does not remain on the land when his occupation there has gone. Either goes to the town to find work there or he migrates overseas. He neither loves the land on which he worked merely as a hired hand, nor are the opportunities of the town unknown to him. Economic troubles. Meanwhile, the property owner and farmers who have neither the wish nor the power to divorce themselves from the soil suffer and complain in vain, for their day as the political rulers of England is over. Nevertheless, the liberal and the conservative intelligentsia are saturated with the free trade doctrines, but economists fail to perceive that agriculture is not merely one industry among many, but also a way of life, unique and irreplaceable in its human and spiritual values. The fate of agriculture is only one example of the near-sightedness characteristics of English state policy. The Victorians make no plans for the future. They are content to meet those demands and to solve those problems whose pressure is already felt. The cosmopolitan spirit. Other causes also made the English lose some of the complacency and sureness of the early year of the century. England was no longer the first in industrial machinery or in military power. The Franco-Prussian War was the first shock, and then America and Germany rose as rival manufacturing power. Some sense of this led to improved technical education in England. It also induced a friendlier and respectful attitude to America than the English political classes had shown during the American Civil War. The democratic England of the new era was better able to understand the United States and the colonies as Canada and Australia were still called rise of socialism. The new situation led also to an anxious interest in modern Germany, which Englishmen had been content to ignore so far. Matthew Arnold's friendship, Garland and George Meredith, Harry Richmond warned England that national education and national discipline in the heart of Europe was creating a new kind of power that had a jealous eye on the easily won, carelessly guarded and ill distributed wealth of England. At the same time, Russia denounced the third employment of wealth in destroying beauty and its ill distribution, so corrupting alike to the superfluously rich and the miserable poor. No doubt there has no strong movement of socialism among the working classes till the last year of the century, but content with the spirit of laissez-faire and growing long before John Stuart Mill died in 1873, bequeathing liberal philosophical doctrines that strongly influenced the thought and practice of the age that followed. Mill's doctrine was semi socialistic. In his thought, democracy and bureaucracy were to work together, and it is largely on these lines that the social fabric of modern England has in fact been constructed, even though Mill himself and his philosophy have passed out of fashion. Prosperity, the new merchant class. In spite of such decays and drawback, the Victorian era was overall an era of great prosperity and increasing wealth in which most sections of society shared. A newly rich and prosperous merchant class came into being as a result of increased overseas trade in the old merchant class. Less shrewd and enterprising was pushed out. The increased prosperity of the nation made it possible for adventurers like Becky, Sharp, and Rodon Crawley to live on credit on nothing a year. Manners were gentle, streets were safer, life was more humane, sanitation was improving fast, working class housing, though still bad, was less bad than ever. Conditions of labor had been improved, real wages had risen, and hours of work had been shortened, but unemployment, sickness, and old age, not yet regularly provided for by the state, still had terror for the workman. Better condition of life. The liberal policies of Peel and Gladstone lifted the weight of taxation from the poor by reducing indirect taxation to a minimum. Besides this, free trade also claimed credit for the enormous increase of shipping overseas trade. Under such condition of free trade prosperity, many articles that were luxurious in the earlier of century were common comfort in the Victorian era. Food, clothing, bedding, furniture were far more abundant than in any previous age. Gas and oil lighting were giving way to electricity. Holidays by the seaside had become a regular part of life for the lower middle class and even to larger section of the working class, particularly in the north. But the weekend out of town was just beginning. It was already a custom among owner of big country houses and their guests, but it was scarcely yet known to the middle class family. Traveling and touring became a crazy. Some toured to explore the highway and by way of their own land on foot or on bicycle. Others roamed over France, Switzerland, and Italy in greater number than ever before. Social climbing, snowboarding. Society was getting mixed. Society in the older and stricter sense of the term was limited word under entry into it being closely guarded by certain Whig and Tory peers. But in the Victoria era, society had a vague, meaning it had grown more open and accessible. Social climbing became a fact. Those in the lower stratum constantly struggled to move up. This turn gave rise to snobbery. Population trend in the beginning of the era. Large families were still customary in the professional, business, and working class world, and the population rose only at a much later date. Did it become evident that a reduction was beginning in the size of families in the first instance? In the professional and middle class families charged with heavy public school fees, and among the better to do artisans struggling to keep up a high standard of life. Science and religion skepticism. Puritanism in ethical and sexual ideas, qualified by too frequent weakness of human nature in practice, was the order of the day. There was much hypocrisy and resort to double standard. The Puritan attitude to life and conduct was calculated by the Anglo-Catholic religion that had grown out of the Oxford movement of the 30s and had spread wide. It was strongest among the parish clergy, but its hold upon the common man was growing weaker. The growth of the scientific outlook and rationalism were undermining religion. But Darwin's theory of evolution and the idea of man descended from a monkey were totally incompatible with existing religious idea of creation and of man's central place in the universe. Naturally, the religious world and the scientific men took up arms to defend their respective positions. The strife raged throughout the Victoria era. The rapid advance of science accelerated the breakup of Victorian compromise tradition and convention. Science with science with its emphasis on reason rather than on faith encouraged the spirit of questioning. Victorian belief, both religious and social, were subjected to a searching scrutiny and found wanting. The publication of Darwin Origin of Species in 1850 is of special significance from the point of view he celebrated theory of evolution contradicted the account of man's origin as given in the Bible. His theory cried conviction as it was logically developed and supported by overwhelming evidence. Man's faith in orthodox religion was shaken. He could no longer accept without questions God's omnipotence, benevolence, mercy. Such orthodox notions of God were contradicted by facts. Similarly, Darwin, with his emphasis on the brutal struggle for existence, which is the law of nature, explored the romantic view of her as a kindly mother having a holy plan of her own. The process started by Darwin was completed by philosophers like Huxley, Spencer Mill. The impact of this development in science and philosophy on the work of Hardy is far-reaching. The rise of pessimism. Though the established order, customs, faiths, and belief traditions and customs were losing their hold on minds of the people, and the new order of things had not yet been established. Man had lost his mooring in God, religion, and nature. The mechanistic view of the universe precluded any faith in a benevolent creator. Man fell to quote Hardy himself, orphan and defrauded. He took a gloomy view toward life, for he felt miserable and helpless with nothing to fall back upon. It was for the first time, says David Cecil, that conscious considered pessimism became a force in English literature. The melancholy poem of Arnold, the poetry of Fitzgerald, Thomas, The City of God, and the works of Thomas Hardy all reflect the pessimistic outlook of the late Victorian era. This growth of pessimism was further encouraged by the flow of pessimistic thought from Europe, where pessimism was much in the air at the time. Liberalism in the early year of 19th century, archaeology and history were rapid progress, and their discoveries strengthened the hands of science in the strife against orthodox beliefs. An academic liberal party of great intellectual distinction and very much in earnest fought the battle to free Oxford and Cambridge from the bondage of church church monopoly and won it by the Test Act 1871. Academic study now embraced physical science and medieval and modern history as strongly as humanism and mathematics. Queen Victoria reign was indeed the period when Oxford and Cambridge were most in the public eye. Their reforms, particularly the abolition of religion tests for academic posts, was one of the chief political questions of the day. Trained intellect gradually became a young man's best passport to learning instead of social patronage or fashionable friends. The most characteristics achievement of the region was the Dictionary of National Biography, initiated and largely financed by a private individual, George Smith. It is the best record of a nation past than any civilization has produced. A change in the direction of levity, if not of laxity, took place, due no doubt in part of to the gradually crumbling of religious faith was, which a strict and slightly ascetic moral code had always been associated when he the hold of religion on the public mind was weakened. Religion could no longer influence the social conduct of century. In the decade of the Yellow Book, and art for art's sake, a more free and frank treatment of sex became increasingly common in literature. Religious movement, the conflict between science and religion among the educated classes was crudely but effectively reproduced in Charles Brodloff's militant atheism preached on public platform to masses of working men, while the last great evangelical revival, the Salvation Army, brought the enthusiasm of conversation to the host of the houseless and unfed, to the drunkard, the criminal, and the hurler, to bring street pants and colored uniform into the service of Protestant religion was something new. It was no less significant that the Salvation Army regarded social work and care of the material condition of the poor and the outcast as an essential part of the Christian mission to bring peace to the souls of men and women. It was largely for this reason the Salvation Army enjoyed such power. Another movement analogous to the Salvation Army in its combination of religious and social motive was total abstinence or teetotalism, not only teetotalism but also the proper and moderate use of wine and beer were encouraged by the increasing amenity and diminishing monotony of life by rival amusement and occupations such as reading, music, playing, and watching organized games, bicycling, sightseeing, country and seaside holidays. Above all, by more active and educated mind and more comfortable homes. Today हमने पेज 10 तक पढ़ा है. ये नॉवल है किसका? ये थॉमस हार्डी का है.